Welcome to the Ask Weldon Show, episode 277. Today we're going to talk about the key thing pros have that novices don't and why I coach pros differently as a result. So we have 4 questions today. 3 of them are from the same person. So thank you, Ryan, for calling in. And this is a reminder, a couple quick announcements. Actually, no, forget that. Let's just jump right into the first question. What are the announcements after this?
Hello, my name is Pedro Veig. I'm from Brazil. I enjoy a lot the show. And the question I have for you is, what type of game do you recommend to invest? Because I see the League of Legends community growing up so fast, but in my country, Free Fire is a game that also has a huge community, and then I don't know where I can focus better. So yeah, thank you.
All right, Pedro. So I'll answer this question from my lens, my perspective, right? And you have to understand that your lens might be different. You might be saying, like, what kind of game should I invest time in if I want to be a successful streamer? That's a different answer. Or if I want to be happy, that's a different answer. Or if I want to play with a certain group of friends, that's a different answer. So all of those are like the lens with which you need to understand the question. But my particular ones is, which one should you invest time at if you want to improve your performance, basically? And I believe that games have that there are games like baseball, football, soccer, in that you aren't going to be playing soccer like when you go to play soccer or football in Brazil, for example, you're going to always be able to play that game. The skills that you develop as a child, you're going to be able to use as a teenager, you're going to be able to use as an adult. The problem is that when you play a video game, eventually that video game is going to die away and another one is going to rise up. Just look at FPSs. You know, we had Fortnite, and then we had PUBG, and then Fortnite, and then we had Apex. So this like sequence of events, if you became an Apex player and you started with PUBG, you had to go through this like cycle of like playing each game and learning the skills in that game. And you want them to transfer. So when you're looking at what game it is that you invest time getting good at, I recommend always picking the best game that trains you in each category of skill. So let me explain what I mean. If you're going to practice, if you're going to play a computer game and you're going to invest time in getting good at it, it's very good to invest time in a game like Valorant or CSGO, where precise mouse movement and mouse accuracy and aiming are incredibly valuable, and you use like the aiming tools in those games to practice them, those combat arena shooters, okay, FPSs. It's very practical to invest time getting good at a strategy-based FPS. So something like a Fortnite or a PUBG or an Apex Legends, where you have this game sense of like when it is you're going to third party somebody and when you're going to hide and where people are moving throughout the world. You need to develop that like open world predictive capability. Warzone is another good example, yes. You're training a different thing when you're training that game. And it's a really good idea to invest time in a top of the line MOBA, because although you need less mouse speed and mouse accuracy, you do need a lot of mental modeling. You need to have a deep knowledge of the game that you use to model out the fights. And then you need to have like very good, like, I would say like rendering speed in your head, where you're like, okay, this is how the fight is going to go. This is what I predict, and this is what I'm going to do as a result. And you have a really good decision tree there. So those games prepare you very well for future games that are worse. Now, let me give you an example. You shouldn't train a lot of hours into World of Warcraft, for example, because World of Warcraft does not prepare you to be better at a MOBA or at a higher skill game like an FPS. But if you're really good at FPS, mouse speed and mouse accuracy, and you're really good at a MOBA like League of Legends, you will annihilate a game like World of Warcraft automatically, because you'll have developed skills that far pass anything that is required in that game. So that is why I recommend a particular class of performance-based games in those genres. Now we jump to, for example, console. If I was going to train console, I would strictly be using essentially like fighting games or Super Smash Brothers to train frame rate look at. So essentially, when you're learning a console game, it's great to play a platformer like Apex or something like that. Except the problem is you don't really want to get super good at Halo or Apex on the controller, because you should just be learning them on the computer, to be honest. Unless you already have years invested in Halo and like computer-based aiming, console-based aiming, like controller-based aiming. Unless you have like years invested in that, you shouldn't like just start now at getting good at that. Instead, you should focus on fighting games where you're essentially looking at frame and trying to have a reaction. You're like, okay, the third frame of this, I need to like animation cancel and block in order to get that off. And then your nuance of like how you look at the game when you're playing a fighting game on the console is like strictly superior to every other kind of console game that you might be playing, in terms of like what you're trying to do with your fingers and what you're trying to connect your eyes to your actions with. So this is all very practical for me because I am training my kids. I'm thinking like, okay, what video game should I allow my kids to play? And basically, after they finish their homework and after they finish their chores, hopefully, they have a choice between like what they want to learn today. I'm like, do you want to get better at your mouse accuracy and speed? Do you want to get better at your strategy? Do you want to get better at your console? You know, and then they essentially have to play Super Smash Brothers, or they have to play Valorant, or they have to play League of Legends, or they have to play some game, and then within that game they have a goal or an ambition, you know, and they have to do a little bit of a warm up and maybe do a little bit of an aim lab and understand how their skills transfer into those games. So that is how I recommend that you parse your game. That you think about how sportified your game is and how universal the skills are that you're learning. Think about what are the real skills that make you click in this game, and how are those skills transferable. And it's really easy to look at like top pros in these massive online FPS arena shooters like PUBG and see that they easily transfer to the next game. They easily transfer to being top players in the next game. And you ask, well, how is that? Well, for one, it's their FPS. So that you got to go into CSGO and you got to go into Valorant. And you got to be really good at this aim. And you have to have the right kind of aim, right? You don't want to have the kind of aim where you like, I don't think you can see my mouse on this stream, but you don't want to have the kind of aim where like you move your mouse over to the thing and then you overshoot it and you bring it back and you hover it on the target and you click, right? You want to have the kind of reaction where you're moving your mouse and as it's crossing over your target, you click at the same time. Or that you immediately stop on the center of your target and also click at the same time. The kind of accuracy that is like a step above probably what you're automatically trying to do, and you're reaching a little bit for something that is like really difficult. So make sure that you're training those also in games like Aim Lab or Kovacs, and then also playing the FPS, and then at the same time think, okay, well, I want to have a strategy day, and in your strategy day, you play different games. So the real answer to your question, Pedro, is if you're looking at improvement in terms of the sport aspect, you need to play a variety of games, but you should play only the ones that are like top tier training games. And if, of course, for entertainment, you can play other games, you know. And then when you're playing those games, you should be focused on training and an improvement and in getting better at them, so that the skills transfer to the next game, and the next game until you suddenly become a pro at the game that you're playing. All right. Thank you very much for your question. Announcements. Hello. Welcome to the stream and the YouTube show. This is being streamed hopefully around 10 a.m. Los Angeles time, Monday through Friday. I'm not going to be streaming on the weekends, heads up. And although some days I won't be streaming, I think the best thing to do is to go to twitch.tv/mynameisweldon, and then clicking the follow button and clicking the notifications button. So you will get a little notification when I go live, and it will show you the title of the show, and then you can decide, okay, I'm going to click it, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to watch the show. And I do this show that you're watching on YouTube, I do this live and then record it there, and then I answer questions and chat with people before and after the show. So it's the best possible way to kind of access me. and it's the one that I recommend. So make sure to check that out, because now it's been a week and we've had 3 shows and it's starting to get pretty consistent. The second thing is I need more questions. So I've basically burnt through now my entire backlog of questions from last summer and from 3 years ago that have been building up. And so I need you to call in, and you will see that there is a call-in thing. When I put up the answer to the next question, it says anchor.fm/Weldon Green. It's my full name. And there you will find my podcast page, and you will be able to essentially call in like these voices that you're hearing here. You just click message and you hold your phone up to your ear like you're calling somebody, and it will send a message to me. You have a minute to record whatever you want. And it makes you sound very nice, by the way. They have a lot of AI algorithms or something that tune up the audio to make sure that it's very clean and precise, no matter how bad your mic is. So if you have a lapel mic that hangs down off of your earphones, and you're talking into it and you're like, I don't really want to be on the radio with a mic like this, like, don't worry about it. You will sound more like you have a mic like this studio microphone than you had ever imagined you could. And let's jump into the second question now from Ryan.
Hey Weldon, Morgan Mindfulness here, longtime listener and a past graduate of the MAC program, and I cannot say enough about how much the MAC program helped me and helped transform almost every facet of my life. But I'm sure you'll be able to go on and talk about that later. So my question for you today is, when working with top esports athletes, as opposed to like your average Joe Schmo bloke on the streets, what are some of the things you keep in mind while teaching them mindfulness? And to be a little bit more specific, like, what are some things you would keep in mind that you wouldn't normally like even bother with when you're working with like pro athletes, as opposed to, just someone who's not as capable?
All right, so this is a really good question, and I have a really good answer, but I need to change the lens a little bit. It's not really something that pros have that normal people don't. It's more like when you are doing the pro life and you're already being paid for it, you're committing a certain amount of sacrifice of other things that you could be doing in order to accomplish a specific thing and try to be world class at it. And so to honor that sacrifice, and that is like, okay, I want to try to do this thing and be world class at it, there are a lot of things that I would suggest or recommend or ask of a pro player that I would never ask of a normal person. Things that might harm their body or risk injuring them, or like perfectionism is a double-edged sword. And whereas with let's say a normal person, I would work on their perfectionism as a defect and try to allow them to have a happy life despite the state of whatever their skill is, or the state of their finances, or the state of their dreams. I'll try to help them reconcile that with reality. With pros, we just use that pain and that suffering as fuel for like training aspects of the game or of life that are more difficult to challenge, because motivation can be low at times. So I would say that the main difference between training a pro player and training like a normal person is that the ambitions and the goals of the training are just fundamentally different. With a pro, the training goals are at the outset, hi Weldon, I know that a lot of the stuff that I'm doing in my life are like questionable choices maybe, or like I might not make it and this might all be for a loss, but I want to use all of my sacrifice and all of the potential pain and suffering that I've caused and all of the damage that I've already probably caused my forearms, and I want to like minimize the risk while possibly maximizing the gain, and I want to continue this track and try to hit the end before something bad happens, but like kind of an at all costs mentality, because there is no like well balanced way to be a professional at sport, at a performance art. Okay, if you're a performance artist and you're either performing League of Legends or shot put or the 100-meter dash or singing, and you want to be the best at it, so you have to compete with like the mass of humanity. So you have to be in the top 0.01%, 0.001%, 0.0001% of people who do this thing. Like, you're competing with people who are crazy, who are literally like defective in the way that they approach the world. Like Michael Phelps did not have a nice, happy, well-balanced, well-being training life, right? He was practically murdering his body. You know, any other person you'd be like, that was, if somebody was being told to do it, it's torture. But he was doing it to himself, kind of. So it's not. So there's like no way to mix that with helping a normal person whose goal is well balanced. Now, there's a way to do imbalance with well-being. That's kind of what I'm doing with a pro. I'm saying like, okay, you're super imbalanced, but we're going to try to do it with well-being mixed in so that you don't go crazy. And then hopefully your competitor over there will go crazy and like burn out or something, but you won't. And so you'll make it and they'll fall like one of those flaming stars, you know, momentary brightness, fizzle out. So you need to have the well-being aspect where you're like trying to do the thing that you can do the best that you can do it, but like most optimally in terms of like taking care of yourself with the minimum risk that you can manage. There's always risk. You just need to manage the risk. But like I would say with like a normal person where the goal is well-balanced. The goal is like, okay, let's do 3 or 4 hours of training the game and then let's stop and let's also get good at your relationship or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your parent-child relationship or your school or like your nutrition or your body or like spread it out, right? And use those other facets of your life. Use those other, like the discipline of going to the gym, the discipline of apologizing to somebody who you think that maybe they're in the wrong, but you need to start the conversation. You use that discipline to bring back that mental strength and resilience to your video game training. So you're kind of like cross-training in life, right? And that's how you bring in that well-balanced approach. But with a pro, I'm not doing that. We're just training the game all day, every day, 24/7, and we're trying to like minimize any possibility of stuff going wrong all the time. So it's less like they have a trait that you don't and more like they have sacrificed everything else and made a commitment to it. And also they're already getting paid for that sacrifice. So like it's kind of okay. But they've given up on the idea of well balance. And I don't recommend that for people who haven't hit the paid level yet because it's too much of a lottery ticket. You're all inning on something that you don't know is going to pan out, and there's a lot of luck involved, and there's a lot of skill involved. And so the best thing to do if you're not a pro is to all in on this well-balanced approach where you are incorporating, like if you can't get to pro video games on like 4 hours of training a day, then you're probably doing something fundamentally wrong. And even if you got pro, you wouldn't be very good at it. Okay? That's what I always tell people. If you can't get to like becoming a pro swimmer on 4 hours. I think Phelps was doing 4.5, maybe 5 hours of training a day, every single day. Like training more is probably not going to help you. So you should make sure that you're training other stuff in your life too, so that you can use these transferable skills you're developing in the next thing you're going to do, because it doesn't look like you're going to make it. So make sure not to all in on the thing that is not already clearly and apparently your career. Make sure to stay in this like well-balanced mode where you're hedging your bets by taking all of the training that you're doing and making sure it applies. Like I said in the first question, you're training a game, but you're training it in a way that you can carry those skills to the next game, which might be your shot. And you're not wasting a single minute because everything you're doing is like building into who you are in this very well-balanced like developmental task. Now, as a pro, we're going to be training a lot of stuff that's very specific just to winning that week at all costs. And it's like a total waste of time if you don't win that week. Like complete waste of time. So I don't recommend that stuff for non-pros. And I would never coach a non-pro that way either, because it's very inefficient. But in the pro scene, you are already there and you're rewarded for winning and losing on a very like small time scale. And like the advantage of wasting all of that time is that people are already paying you for that wasted time. And if you make good on the lottery ticket, which basically you're just trying to optimize the number of shots you have at winning when you're in sport, then it like the math works out. All right, enough of that. Ryan also mentioned the mindfulness app or program you can check out here, mindgames.gg. I'll plug that a little bit. It's the sponsor of this podcast. mindgames.gg. It's in the beta right now of the app. The video course is still available. If you log into the app, you can find it in the side menu. I'll tell you what the password is. Just message me on Discord. I think I put the password in the heading of the app, but maybe I didn't. And that'll get you into that portfolio. You can watch the entire video course, but the video course is also being cut apart and like turned into the app, and you will see that there. All right, let's jump into the third question, also from Morgan Mindfulness.
Hey Weldon, Morgan again. I believe at one point or another in the past on this show, we've talked about morning routines, nighttime routines, and I've even brought up something called the 5-minute journal. And one of the practices in that journal was gratitude journaling. I noticed that in the newest rendition of the Mac app, in order to get into your lessons, you actually have to go through something similar and listing 3 things that you're grateful for. And this made me wonder how much you actually incorporate that in your performance coaching when you're working with pro athletes. Is gratitude training something you work with them on a daily basis, or is this something that kind of gets put on the back burner because of the nature of pro sports?
All right. So gratitude training, I prefer the term gratitude conditioning. I think it's a little bit different than training. I think essentially you're conditioning your brain to see the world in a more grateful way. And the only reason that I do it is because so far there is not a lot of research on burnout. And people who are in the burnout field might disagree with me. They might say, there's loads of research on burnout. But what I'm saying is, like, there's a lot of research on chlorophyll or like fruit flies, like a lot. There's a lot of research on cancer, okay? Like a lot. We're talking like thousands of articles a month, right? There's not a lot of research on burnout. Just because there's a decent amount of research on burnout, and you can go reference like hundreds and maybe even 1,000 studies, does not mean there's a lot of research on burnout. As a phenomena, burnout is not very well researched yet. But there are some very clear understandings about burnout. So this might change in the future as we learn more and more about this psychological, biological, social phenomenon, biopsychosocial phenomenon. But one thing that is very clear is that gratitude conditioning is a moderating factor to burnout. So the more grateful that you are, the way that you see the world through a grateful lens, the more that you can suffer before burning out, like psychologically. Now, that doesn't mean physically. Like physical burnout is a different thing. When your central nervous system is just like done because your muscles are just totally toasted or something. I'm talking about the psychological fuel kind of burnout. So the dose response, that is when you measure how much of something that people have to do to how much of a response there is in the statistical measuring of the result, gratitude conditioning has an incredibly low dose for an incredibly high response in terms of holding off burnout. And since my job is basically to help people train as hard as they can until burnout, we want to delay burnout as long as possible. Gratefulness conditioning is one of the better ways to spend your time if you're planning on pushing back the burnout window to like another, like one day later or one day after that or one day after that, so that you hit burnout a day later and then you like, and by the way, we never go all the way to burnout. That's a horrible idea because then you have a long time to recover. You want to go to overtrained and then you want to lay off the training. But anyway, great gratitude conditioning is a very effective use of your time in terms of efficiency for delaying, like increasing the amount of time that you can stress yourself, increasing the amount of time that you can be motivated, increasing the amount of time that you can push yourself before psychologically burning out. And that is like a general research finding. It's not true of individuals, right? So when I'm on a team of 5 people, I need to gauge for each individual person how effective this research finding is. But in general study, using statistics on a population of people, like it has a good dose response. About the same as walking, from what I recall, like going on a walk. So if you think about going on a 15-minute walk versus writing in a journal for 5 minutes, 5 minutes is less and you don't have to move out of your desk. You get the same effect of like a 15-minute walk in terms of prevention of burnout. So for dose response, yes, I think it's like one of the top 3 tools that I would ever use in a training routine, simply because of efficiency. It doesn't work on every single team with every single athlete, because you need to gauge it to the individual, you build a portfolio of things that player is most amenable to doing and spending their time in, and that is the easiest for them. So if they have to stress themselves and push themselves to write in a diary and they hate it, it's not actually going to help them burn out. It's just going to be something that they avoid and burns them out even more, right? That person might be going on walks, is what I'm saying. But if I'm building an app for the masses, then it's a key feature in the app, because as a mass tool, it's one of the better ways to like hit a broad spectrum of people and, like, generally speaking, raise their wellness or their well-being like a certain percentage up. So that is why gratefulness conditioning is in the app, and that is why it's currently like a big part of the first element that I would incorporate into any opening training program. And that might change in the future. I think I hedged my bets on that pretty well with the answer. So let's jump into the last question of the show. Also from Ryan.
Hey Weldon, yet again, Morgan Mindfulness here with another question for you. So I was wondering, when working with new esports athletes that are unfamiliar with mindfulness practices and are getting into mindfulness practices for the first time, what are some of the things you look on when you're working with them one-on-one to try to decide when it's time to start implementing some of the mindfulness practices into their gameplay and into their daily routines when it comes to like their actual game that they are maining, and when it might be time to spend more time working on the basics of the mindfulness and making sure they have down the fundamentals before you go and try and ride the bike?
Okay, so sport mindfulness versus seated meditation training. I introduced the idea on the first day when I'm teaching about mindfulness, and I'm like, okay, what is meditation? It's this. Seated training comes from the Buddhist tradition. Here are a bunch of different ways that, like, the Buddhist religion, a bunch of different Buddhist religions, and ways that Buddhism like does meditation. Here are some like commercial meditation systems, like Transcendental or whatever, TM, and like purportedly what they do. Here is the science research on the concept behind meditation, which for ease of terminology, we're just calling mindfulness, which is basically the training of focus or the training of present state awareness. The training of where it is that you're paying attention to, maybe you could say, or the act of. You don't have to say the training of, the act of. What we're going to do when we're training mindfulness is essentially to train that act of doing that thing. And then there are a bunch of times in your life when you're just like mindful. Like if we talk about what mindful is, it means like, where is your attention? Like, let's talk about flow state. Let's talk about different games in your sport when you're like fully focused on like a very precise thing and you're switching serially between different inputs. These are like states of supreme focus and mindfulness. And then I say, okay, so like when you're distracted and you're making mistakes, we would say that like you're unmindful. This is, I think, day 3 or day 4 of the program that I introduced that idea. And I'm like, okay, so then these would be really premier times in your sport where you would practice trying to incorporate the seated training that you're doing in the morning, which is building up the muscle. You want to use those muscles in the game. So these are great times to use it. So I incorporate the idea immediately at the outset when I'm introducing the concept. But then I don't think that we actually sit down with a worksheet, make a list of times in the game, put up like little sticky notes and like set a timer or a buzzer on your watch and like try to actually do mindfulness in the game actively as part of the homework for the program, like directly, like your homework tonight is this, until like week 5. So that would be 5 times 25, no 7, so 35 days in, so 35 sessions in. So we do a lot of groundwork in like how to feel what mindfulness is when you're doing it as a seated training, and understand what it isn't, and understand what focus isn't, and like making sure they really know, like, I can tell you what my brain is paying attention to right now. I can feel my brain shifting focus between this thing and this thing. I can tell when for the last 15 seconds my brain has been randomly thinking something completely else. I can feel all the sensations in my body. I can feel the pressure of the chair, and I can feel when I breathe my pelvic floor moving. And like all of these things are kind of tools that you kind of need if you want to do it super well when you're incorporating it into like standing up and walking across the room. Like I think I was actually doing mindfulness walking for months before I was able to like properly and nicely well, in my opinion, stand up from the chair mindfully. Meaning that like I'm feeling, yeah, as well as I can now. I guess I could probably always doing better, but I would say like the way that I did it in the first week that I tried it versus the way that I did it 3 or 4 months after meditating almost every day was like a fundamentally different kind of act. So I think you kind of need a good, what is 35 divided by 15? So 35 times, not divided by times, let's say 10. So 350. Why did I even use a calculator for that? I thought I was going to use like 7.5 or something. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, 350 minutes. So 350 divided by 60. About 5.8 hours, I guess, of meditation. So let's just round that up. Let's just say you get it in a good 6 hours of meditation total, cumulative. And then, yeah, so this is obviously not very scientific, right? I'm just pulling out these numbers, but that's when I introduce it in my program. That happens to be 350 minutes of meditation in. That happens to be around 5.75 hours. So maybe a good ballpark for you if you just want a base starting point is like get them through 5 hours of actual meditation. And then varied, obviously not just all seated training, but like some, maybe a little bit of walking training, experimenting with like hand washing training, stuff like that. And then start the worksheets of like, let's incorporate this into the game. But that doesn't stop you from presenting these ideas earlier and letting them experiment with it. Experimentation is like super key. Curiosity is super key for motivation. But I wouldn't waste time like actively trying to get them to do it in game because they probably just do it wrong. Even though there not really is a wrong, but there is a wrong. Let's be honest here. But like, there's not really a wrong way to meditate, but there's definitely a wrong way to head a football and not twist your ankle. And there's definitely a wrong way to be mindful in game. So anyway, that is the answer to that question. And that's the show for you today. Remember, everybody, here is the URL. Call in your questions at anchor.fm/Weldon Green. There's a button there. You can click message. You can also just type the URL in as you see it here. Please, please, please submit your questions for Monday's show. And I will see you guys next time.